The first blush of dawn spilled faint light over the weather-beaten strip mall that housed Glen Park Auto. The weak sunlight brushed across the faded sign above the garage, as if trying to awaken something that once thrived there. Ethan Ross parked his old pickup truck in the employee lot, the engine rattling softly before fading into silence. A delicate wisp of steam rose from the travel mug nestled in his cup holder. The scent of strong black coffee, so thick you could stand a spoon in it, his late wife used to joke, filling the cab with memory. That line echoed in his chest now, more like a whisper from a place that still ached. It had been years since Sarah passed, but the smell of that coffee still hit like a wave, pulling his thoughts to mornings they'd shared, to a life that felt simpler, even in its chaos. Mondays were always the busiest, but today carried a different weight, an invisible pressure that coiled in the air, like something big was about to unfold. Ethan turned off the ignition, but stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the dimly lit Glen Park Auto sign. 6 years ago, back when Old Man Parker ran the place, it had been a neighborhood garage built on trust and loyalty. Back then, a handshake meant more than a contract. Now, swallowed by a global corporate chain, everything ran on metrics, margins, and productivity dashboards. The soul of the place had been papered over with company logos and performance charts. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake, his younger brother. "I've got the interview at 2 p.m. today. Wish me luck, big bro." A smile crept onto Ethan's face, the first real one of the morning. Jake had just graduated college and was still trying to find his footing, bouncing from one part-time gig to another. Today's interview might be the breakthrough he needed. Ethan thought back to when their parents died. Jake had only been 12, and Ethan, just 24, had stepped into the role of both guardian and brother. Then, when Sarah died 3 years ago after a short, brutal battle with cancer, it was Jake who showed up every day. He didn't say much, but his presence had been the quiet strength Ethan leaned on when he had nothing else to hold. "You've got this. Just be yourself. Dinner's on me tonight," Ethan replied, fingers tightening slightly around the phone before slipping it back into his pocket. For a fleeting moment, a rare thing stirred in him. Hope. Life had taken so much, but Jake was something he'd managed to keep safe. He stepped out of the truck, the cold morning air brushing against his face like a silent greeting. The steam from his coffee rose like a signal, curling in the quiet. The screen on his phone read 6:47 a.m. 13 minutes early, like always. It was the only routine he could still control in a world that seemed to change without asking. "Morning," Ethan called out as he entered the garage. Darius, the youngest mechanic on the team, was already setting up his workbench. "Word is the district manager's dropping by today. Everyone's got that look. You know, like they're waiting for a pop quiz they forgot to study for." Ethan gave a small nod. "Tom Driscoll, he sent an email about new efficiency protocols." Darius rolled his eyes, but before he could say anything, Rita, the no-nonsense service manager, stepped out of the break room, clipboard in hand, her posture tight like she was bracing for a storm. "Efficiency protocols?" she muttered, more like a corporate chokehold. Miguel, flat on his back, under a Honda Civic, heard her and slid out, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. "There 3 oil changes in 1 hour? Sure, if we cut corners, which they say they don't want." The air grew tense, taut like a stretched string on the verge of snapping. Then came the voice, sharp, cold. "Unless you're suggesting we should cut corners." Tom Driscoll had arrived, 15 minutes ahead of schedule, of course. He strode in with the kind of energy that made people stand straighter for no real reason. Tall, immaculately groomed, and utterly untouched by real labor, Tom wore a crisp white dress shirt, tailored slacks, and leather shoes so polished you could check your reflection in them. In his hand was a tablet held like a sword and shield in one. "Good morning, everyone," he said, as though the greeting were a legal requirement. "I've reviewed last week's numbers. We have some serious performance gaps to address." Rita crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. "Customer satisfaction's up 12% from last quarter. Profit per ticket may have dipped, but corporate doesn't hand out bonuses for happy customers." Tom cut in, eyes locked on his screen. "They reward profitability." Ethan said nothing. He moved to his workstation and began arranging his tools with methodical care. Each wrench, each socket was set into its slot like it was part of a ritual. One last attempt at order in an increasingly disordered world. He'd seen men like Tom before, men who had never lifted an engine or stood in the freezing cold to change a tire, who measured success in graphs but never heard a mother whisper thank you through tears. Ethan had learned a long time ago, people like Tom only understood one language: results. But deep down, Ethan also knew today would be different. He repeated the quiet mantra that had become his survival mechanism since Sarah's passing. Keep your head down, do good work, go home. The passion he once had for this trade had faded, eroded by grief and bureaucracy. But his skill hadn't left him, and his integrity, that still burned, silent, stubborn, and unshakable. Tom gathered everyone around a whiteboard, ready to launch into what looked like a full-scale corporate campaign. Ethan hung back, watching in silence. He noticed Tom's left hand. The wedding ring that had been there during his last visit was now gone, but the tan line remained, a quiet relic of something that had slipped away. Marriage, compassion, humanity. Maybe not just Ethan had lost things. The pause in Tom's voice was intentional, and it struck where it hurt most. "Your customer satisfaction scores are outstanding, Mr. Ross, but your average ticket value is the lowest in the entire district." Ethan responded calmly, his tone even. "I only recommend what the customer truly needs." "A noble sentiment," Tom said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "But this is a business, not a charity. From this point forward, every service must be logged and billed, no exceptions." Rita started to protest, but Tom cut her off. "This directive comes straight from corporate. The auto service industry is changing. You either adapt or you go under, like the 3 independent shops that closed down in this county last year." He uncapped his marker and slammed it onto the whiteboard like the gavel of a judge. "Now let's go over the new protocols." The next hour was a blur of policy codes, timestamp rules, performance metrics, and aggressive upselling strategies. While Tom's voice droned on like a metronome of control, Ethan's mind wandered to the drawer in his toolbox where he kept a photo of Sarah. She was smiling in it, wide and bright, in her old hiking boots. You wouldn't know from looking that cancer had already begun its quiet destruction. It was Sarah who had convinced him to stay at Glen Park after the corporate takeover. "People still need someone honest," she'd said. "Be that person, Ethan." By 10 a.m., the garage was in full motion. Tom had stationed himself inside the office, a glass box with a perfect view of every mechanic and their every move. On the monitors, the day's schedule ran beside the live feed from the security cameras. "He's watching us like a hawk," Miguel muttered as he worked alongside Ethan on a transmission repair. "Just do the job right," Ethan replied. "They can't argue with quality work." "They can, and they will," Miguel said dryly. Last month at Riverside, he fired 2 guys for being too thorough, called it inefficient diagnostics. Ethan said nothing. He kept his eyes on the job, his movements deliberate. In a world that was becoming more digital and disconnected by the day, touching tools, grease, and steel grounded him. Machines didn't lie. They didn't manipulate. They either worked or they didn't. And when they didn't, you fixed them, with skill and honesty. At 11:30, Rita approached. "We getting backed up. Can you push your lunch a bit?" "No problem," Ethan said, wiping his hands. "Jake's got that interview at 1. I was planning to call him around then anyway. Rita's face softened. Architecture firm, right? Tell him I'm rooting for him. I will, Ethan smiled. As Rita walked away, he happened to catch Tom watching from behind the glass wall again, fingers tapping rapidly on his tablet. Every glance, every exchange. It was all being catalogued, judged. The tension in the air was thick, like the smell of engine exhaust in a closed garage. Everyone was moving faster than usual, and it wasn't for the sake of customers. It was fear of being next. Ethan swiped at the sweat on his brow, not noticing the streak of grease it left across his cheek. The morning had been relentless, repair after repair, barely enough time to catch his breath, and still, Tom's words echoed. No freebies, no exceptions. It was the complete opposite of why Ethan fell in love with this work in the first place. It wasn't just about fixing cars, it was about restoring trust, about helping someone get back on the road safely, not because you had to, but because it was the right thing to do. Just before noon, the service bay doors slid open once more. A worn-down blue minivan lurched into the lot, its brakes shrieking with the sound of desperation. Ethan looked up from his work, tool still in hand. From the driver's seat stepped a woman, gaunt, clearly exhausted, and yet her eyes held a fierce determination. She moved to the back seat and carefully lifted out a baby carrier with an infant inside. A small boy, no older than 3, climbed out behind her, clinging to her leg as if the pavement might swallow him whole. Ethan set down his wrench. His eyes flicked to the office window. Tom was watching. The glint in his eye was sharp. The tablet in his hands looked more like a weapon than a device. No freebies, no exceptions. But Ethan knew. Some rules were made to be broken. The woman walked hesitantly to the front counter. Her posture was tight, nerves fraying at the edges. She cradled the baby carrier with one arm, the other gripping the toddler's small hand. Ethan noticed the little boy's sneakers scuffed and worn at the heels. The laces were mismatched, one replaced with a piece of string. The woman's clothes were clean but faded, and her ponytail looked like it had been tied in a rush. The kind of look that said she hadn't had time to think about herself in a long time. "Hi, I don't have an appointment," she began, voice trembling. "But my brakes." She trailed off, pausing to steady her breath. In this horrible grinding noise, sometimes the pedal sinks almost to the floor before it catches. Rita looked up from her monitor, typed something quickly, then sighed. "We're pretty booked today. Soonest I can fit you in is Thursday afternoon." The woman's face fell, like someone had pulled the plug on the last bit of hope she had. "I can't wait that long. I start a new job tomorrow, on the other side of town, and I need to drive the kids to daycare first thing in the morning." Her voice dropped lower, touched by embarrassment. "Is there any way I could pay next week, after I get my first paycheck? I swear I'll pay, just not today." Before Rita could respond, Tom emerged from the office like a sudden cold wind, tablet in hand, smile thin and forced. "Ma'am, our technicians operate on a strict schedule," he said with carefully rehearsed courtesy, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. "Company policy requires payment at the time of service." The toddler looked up at him, then quickly buried his face against his mother's leg. The baby let out a soft whimper. "I understand," the woman whispered. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of the day pressing down. "I'll try somewhere else." The little boy glanced up at Tom, then immediately buried his face against his mother's leg. The baby in the carrier whimpered softly. "I understand," the woman said, her small shoulders trembling. "I'll try somewhere else." Ethan stood just a few feet away, wiping his hands on a rag as he quietly observed. Words like, grinding noise, and brake pedal to the floor echoed in his mind like red alert signals. Those weren't symptoms to ignore, especially not with two children in the same vehicle. "Let me take a quick look," he said, stepping forward. "It won't take more than a few minutes to diagnose." Tom's expression tightened, his lips pressing into a thin line, but with customers nearby he merely gave a curt nod. "5 minutes, Ross, then get back to the Peterson job." The woman, Jessica, exhaled in relief, as if she'd been pulled back from drowning. "Thank you. I'm Jessica." "Ethan," he said with a gentle smile. "Let's see what we're working with." The minivan was well over 12 years old. The blue paint had peeled in patches, like tired skin worn thin by sun and time. A plastic toy dinosaur rested on the dashboard, next to a stack of job applications. She was holding things together. Barely. "Mind if I take it for a quick test drive?" Ethan asked. "Of course," Jessica replied, handing him the keys. "I'll wait here with the kids." Ethan drove the van to an open lift and raised it. One glance was all it took. Brake pads worn completely to metal, one side leaking fluid, and the rotors scored as deep as old wood. It was a miracle the system hadn't failed entirely. As he brought the van back down, the grinding noise it made was enough to make him wince. He returned the keys. Jessica was soothing the fussy baby while her son played quietly with his toy truck by the curb. "Is it serious?" she asked, already bracing herself for bad news. "Your brake pads are completely gone. The rotors are shot too. It's not safe, not with kids in the car." Jessica closed her eyes for a beat. "How much? Labor and parts?" "Around $380. She went pale. "I don't have that. Not until at least next week." Through the window, Ethan spotted Tom watching them, arms crossed, lips pursed, ready to pounce. No payment, no service, no exceptions, that was the rule. But then Ethan looked at the baby in the carrier, blissfully unaware of danger. The boy beside her was coloring a cartoon puppy with a marker that had long since dried out. He thought of Sarah. What would she have done in this moment? He thought of Jake. Had someone once given Jake a chance? Could one small act of kindness change a life? "Give me a moment," Ethan said quietly. He turned and walked back inside. He headed straight to his toolbox, lifted a folded cloth beneath his neatly arranged wrenches. Hidden underneath was his personal credit card, reserved for true emergencies. Like when Jake didn't have rent, or when Sarah's medical bills had arrived without warning. Ethan pulled the parts from the inventory room himself, scanned them under his own name at the employee discount. Tom was too busy scolding Darius over a missed time entry to notice. Rita caught Ethan's eye from across the room. She gave him a small nod. No words were needed. For the next 40 minutes, Ethan worked non-stop. New pads, new rotors, every bolt torqued to spec. His movements were quick, precise, but the sweat on his brow wasn't from the labor. It was from the risk of being caught. When the job was done, he lowered the van and ran one final test. The brakes responded smoothly. No screeching, no hesitation. Safe. Jessica sat on a bench outside, her baby finally asleep in the carrier. She was helping her son color a ripped picture of a puppy. "All said," Ethan said, handing back the keys. "But I told you I don't have the money yet." "It's okay," he said gently, cutting her off. "I don't understand. And the parts came from our reused stock. I had some time, that's all," he said, glancing around to make sure Tom wasn't within earshot. "Just get home safe. And someday, if you can, pass it on." Jessica was speechless. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just drive safe." Ethan watched the minivan pull away from the garage. Jessica waved at him through the window. He waved back. unaware that reflected in the glass behind him, Tom Driscoll had seen everything. As Ethan began tidying up his tools, a long shadow fell across his workbench. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. The air grew heavier, like the garage itself had held its breath. "Step into my office. Now." Tom's voice rang out, cold and hard as steel. Ethan stood tall, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked across the shop like a man headed to court, each step heavier than the last. Through the glass, he saw Rita's hand hovering near the phone, torn between impulse and protocol. Tom shut the door behind them with a sharp click. On the screen behind him, a paused video frame showed Ethan scanning the parts in the supply room. "You think I'm stupid, Ross?" Tom asked, voice low and dangerous. Ethan said nothing. His expression remained calm even as his heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. "I asked you a question," Tom said, his voice sharp with intent. "No, sir, I don't think you're stupid." "Then why the hell would you think I wouldn't find out about you fixing that van on company time using company equipment?" He tapped a button on the tablet. The security footage came to life, showing Ethan working on the minivan, then handing back the keys without taking a payment. Ethan took a deep breath. Her brakes were shot. She had 2 kids in the car. Not our problem. It would have been if they crashed. Tom's jaw clenched. "That's Mr. Driscoll to you. And save me the morality speech. You broke at least 4 corporate policies." He pulled up a disciplinary form. Unauthorized parts usage. Unauthorized labor. Misuse of company resources. I could even classify this as theft. "Theft." Ethan's voice cracked. "I paid for the parts with my own card. Using your employee discount, which is only approved for personal vehicles," Tom snapped. "Maybe read the handbook again." Through the glass, the shop had gone eerily still. Miguel and Darius pretended to work, eyes darting toward the office. Rita stood a little closer, face tense with worry. Ethan kept his voice steady. "I've worked at Glen Park for 8 years. My customer satisfaction ratings are the highest in the district. I made a judgment call." "That's exactly the problem," Tom cut in. "You don't get to make judgment calls anymore. No one here does. This isn't some mom-and-pop garage where you play the hero. We have systems. We have quotas. We have profits to meet." "So what now?" Ethan asked, though in his gut he already knew. Tom placed the tablet firmly on the desk, his tone ringing clear. "Now I make an example out of you." He raised his voice loud enough for the entire garage to hear. "Ethan Ross, you're terminated. Effective immediately. Turn in your company badge. Clean out your personal tools." From outside, someone gasped. The word had landed. Ethan stood motionless. 8 years, wiped out in a sentence. Jake, his interview. Rent due. Everything inside his mind whirled like a hurricane. Tom opened the office door wide, making sure everyone could hear the rest. Mr. Ross thought the rules didn't apply to him. He used our time and resources to perform a free repair for some stranger with a sob story. This is a business, not a charity. Ethan scanned the room, waiting for someone, Rita, Miguel, anyone, to speak up. But the silence held. Fear, like exhaust fumes, filled the air, invisible but suffocating. Ethan didn't blame them. Everyone had families, bills, lives they couldn't risk. Standing up for what's right sometimes meant sacrificing everything, and not everyone was ready for that. "I'll collect my things," Ethan said quietly, voice calm like a still lake, hiding the undertow beneath. Tom wasn't finished. "That footage has already been sent to corporate, in case anyone else feels the urge to grow a bleeding heart like yours." Every word was clinical, surgical, each one cut deeper than the last. Ethan carefully packed up his tools. The wrenches, the sockets, the ratchets. Each one slid into place in the rolling cabinet he'd brought with him from his last shop job. His movements were precise, deliberate, One final act of dignity in the face of humiliation. The toolbox was a gift from Sarah, his late wife, given to him not long before she passed. A high-end professional-grade set, built to last a lifetime. Read the card that came with it. For the man who can fix anything. Except this time, he couldn't fix himself. Customers walking by sensed something was wrong. Some paused. An older man gave Ethan a solemn nod, eyes filled with quiet sorrow, as if he knew how this story ended. Rita came over, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right. Ethan, we should all be walking out with you." "Don't," Ethan said, not looking up. "Save your daughter's college fund." He gave the shop one last look, the place that had been his second home. Then he pushed the toolbox toward the exit. Tom stood in the office doorway, arms folded, watching with smug satisfaction. No one met Ethan's eyes. Only the creak of the toolbox wheels echoed across the concrete, dragging behind them the weight of 8 years of loyalty, pride, and silence. Outside, the sun was bright and indifferent, oblivious to the fact that one man's world had just fallen apart. Ethan loaded his tools into the back of his aging pickup, each lift a mental calculation. How long savings would last, which builds could be delayed. As he closed the truck bed, something caught his eye. A flash of blue down the block. The minivan was gone. But at least those kids would get home safe today. A small win. Sometimes that's all you've got. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, but he didn't turn the key. He should have been out celebrating Jake's interview by now. He should have been updating his resume. But instead, he just sat there, trying to breathe through the wreckage of what had just collapsed around him. The text arrived. "Jake. Interview went amazing, bro. They asked me back to meet the partner tomorrow." A faint smile crept across Ethan's face. At least, something had gone right today. He began typing a reply when something moved in the rearview mirror. A sleek, black luxury car glided into the parking lot like a predator, quiet, deliberate. It stopped right at the entrance to Glen Park Auto. Not the type of car they usually saw here, a high-end German sedan meant for senior executives. Ethan squinted. A tall man, maybe in his 60s, stepped out. Tailored suit, expensive but understated, yet something about his presence felt grounded. The man turned and said something, and from the back seat stepped her, Jessica, or at least someone who looked exactly like her. But she was completely different. Gone was the weary, stressed-out mother. In her place stood a poised professional in a navy blazer and pencil skirt, her hair neatly pinned up, a tablet in hand, no baby carrier in sight. Ethan blinked. Maybe the stress was catching up to him. But no, it was her. She was speaking to the older man, confident, composed. The rear door opened again. A young man stepped out, carrying the baby, dressed very differently this time. On the other side, a woman held the little boy's hand. The same boy, still holding his toy truck. And suddenly, the puzzle snapped into place. He hadn't helped a struggling mother. He'd just been part of a staged performance. But why? The woman, no longer Jessica, saw Ethan. Her eyes flashed with recognition, and something that looked like guilt. She said something under her breath. The older man turned and looked straight at Ethan. Then he motioned for him to come over. Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to drive away. But another part, something that felt like fate, pulled him out of the truck and toward them. "Mr. Ross," the older man called out as Ethan approached. His voice carried natural authority, but it also held warmth. "I'm glad we caught you before you left." "Do I know you?" Ethan asked, eyeing the woman, no longer the desperate mother from earlier. "No, but I know you." the man said with a warm smile. Harvey Dane, CEO of Transnational Auto Care. Ethan froze. His hand moved to shake out of habit, but his mind reeled. And this is Natalie Brooks, my executive assistant and lead auditor. We've met, Ethan replied, unable to mask the bitterness in his voice. Natalie, no longer Jessica, looked visibly uncomfortable, but Harvey stepped in smoothly. She was simply doing her job. He checked his watch. If my timing's right, Tom Driscoll fired you about 20 minutes ago? Ethan nodded. Sir, if this was some kind of test, I'm afraid I failed it miserably. Harvey let out a genuine laugh. Quite the opposite. You passed with flying colors. He looked toward the building. But I think this conversation needs to include Mr. Driscoll and your entire team. Shall we? Still reeling, Ethan followed Harvey back inside. Natalie and the rest of the family trailed behind. The sight froze the reception area into stunned silence. Rita's eyes went wide. Mr. Dane? We had no idea you'd be conducting an inspection today. Tom burst from his office, pasting on a stiff smile the moment he saw Ethan. Mr. Dane, what an honor. I wasn't informed of your visit. Was the point, Tom, Harvey said, his voice colder now. Mr. Natalie, he turned to the woman who, just hours earlier, had posed as a struggling mother. Natalie stepped forward, tablet in hand. Mr. Driscoll, I conducted a covert empathy audit at this location this morning, she announced. Tom's face turned the color of chalk. Empathy audit, someone whispered. The first phase of a surprise assessment, Harvey explained. After we saw a sharp decline in customer satisfaction following the new performance protocols, I wanted to witness firsthand how our branches were treating people in need. Natalie nodded toward Ethan. And I must say, Mr. Ross exceeded every expectation. She looked directly at Tom. Others did not. Tom stood like a fish flapping on dry land, the empire of metrics and procedures crumbling right beneath him. Harvey rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I believe we need to have a serious discussion about your future with this company, Mr. Ross. His smile was warm now. Efficiencies if after all this you still want to work with Transnational. Ethan looked around, faces full of disbelief, Rita's eyes full of hope, and Tom's laced with panic. Just 20 minutes ago he thought his life was over. Now, standing in the very place he'd been cast out, beside the CEO of the entire company, it felt like this might just be the beginning. I'm listening, Ethan said. Harvey turned to the team of mechanics, customers, and staff. I'd like everyone to join us out in the main garage. Customers too, if they're willing. We'll hold the meeting there. The shop moved like a sudden assembly. Mechanics wiped their hands, customers folded their newspapers, and Rita flipped the sign to read, "Back in 15 minutes." Tom hurried after Harvey, trying to regain control. Mr. Dane, perhaps this is better discussed in private. No, Tom, Harvey interrupted. Company matters should be handled transparently. Something you seem to have forgotten. The group formed a wide semicircle around the center of the garage. Natalie connected her tablet to the large monitor, usually reserved for diagnostic specs, but today it would display something else entirely: humanity. The actors who had played Natalie's children stood quietly to the side, the little boy still clutching his toy truck. Harvey took center stage, his silhouette framed by the lifts and cabinets. Even in an expensive tailored suit, he looked completely at home, as though he'd once knelt beneath these very hoods, grease on his hands, grit in his teeth. For those who don't know me, I'm Harvey Dane, he began, his voice steady and resonant. I founded Glen Park Auto 43 years ago with one garage and one simple philosophy: fix it right, treat people right. He nodded toward the prominent Transnational Auto Care logo on the wall, then looked around the room at the employees and customers gathered. When we grew into transnational auto care 15 years ago, I believed that philosophy could grow with us. He gave a brief nod to Natalie. Miss Brooks, if you would, please show everyone what you recorded. Natalie nodded and tapped her tablet. The large monitor flickered to life, playing a crystal-clear video of the green minivan pulling into the garage earlier that morning. The timestamp read 11:42 a.m. To provide some context, Natalie began, her voice calm but carrying a thread of empathy. This footage is part of a company-wide initiative called the Empathy Audit. We became concerned when customer satisfaction scores took a steep drop after implementing the new performance protocols. The video continued, showing the full interaction between Ethan and Jessica, from her request for help to Ethan's careful inspection of the brakes and his final decision to assist. The sound was clear, each word, each breath captured. When the clip reached the moment Ethan said, "Pay it forward to someone else someday," a murmur of emotion rippled through the room. Rita dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "Next," Natalie said, her tone still professional but now tinged with feeling, "we have the exchange between Mr. Ross and Mr. Driscoll in the office." The garage fell silent as Tom's cold voice played through the speakers, each accusation sharp, each word dripping with corporate detachment. Then came the line, chilling in its finality. "This isn't your mom-and-pop garage where you get to play hero. This is a company." Harvey raised a hand to pause the video. "That right there, Tom. That's the problem," he said evenly, though his voice carried weight. "At what point did we start believing that compassion and smart business were mutually exclusive?" Tom opened his mouth. "Sir, the protocols were implemented to reduce waste and boost efficiency, not to strip away humanity," Harvey interrupted. This time he turned to address the staff and customers gathered. "I used to be a mechanic. I know what it's like to look a mother in the eye and tell her her car isn't safe for her kids. And I also know some of the right decisions don't come from a handbook." Natalie queued up the next video. Ethan pushing his tool chest out of the shop, co-workers watching in stunned silence. The image froze the room. Harvey looked back at Ethan. "When you chose to help a stranger and shoulder the cost yourself, you exemplified the values this company was built on." Then his eyes shifted to Tom, and values that sadly have been buried under spreadsheets and empty slogans. Tom's face flushed red. "With all due respect, sir, emotions don't generate quarterly profits. The board has made performance expectations very clear." "Interesting point," Harvey replied, gesturing to Natalie. She tapped her screen, bringing up a new chart. The monitor displayed two graphs side by side. The first showed a steady decline in customer retention across all transnational locations after the new protocols were introduced. The second showed Glen Park far above the average. A bold green line stood out. "Customer returns tied to Ethan Ross." "Loyal customers are profitable customers," Harvey said, "and Mr. Ross has generated over $46,000 in repeat revenue just this year. That's the value of treating customers like people, not walking wallets." Darius and Miguel burst into applause. A few customers joined in. "And what about today's unauthorized repair?" "Roughly $380.00, Harvey answered for him. "A small investment in goodwill, something that returns tenfold through trust and word of mouth." Then he stepped closer to Tom, lowering his voice, but not its clarity. "You know what really costs this company, Tom? Toxic management, leading with fear, turning people into metrics." Silence. Harvey adjusted his tie and delivered the final word. "Tom Driscoll, you are no longer a fit for transnational auto care." Tom stood frozen, pale and rigid. "You can't fire me for following policy. You hit your targets while dismantling everything that made this company worth building," Harvey replied coldly. Your personal belongings will be shipped home. Security will escort you off the premises. Two of the men who had posed as customers stepped forward. Tom looked around for support, but received only averted eyes. And then he walked out, shoulders stiff, a stark contrast to the dignity with which Ethan had left just hours earlier. When the door closed behind him, Harvey turned to Ethan with a sincere smile. Now, Mr. Ross, about your future here at Transnational, I think we have a lot to discuss. The garage felt lighter. The air was different. Staff returned to their tasks with relief on their faces. Customers nodded and whispered to each other. They had just witnessed something rare in the corporate world: justice and truth. Harvey led Ethan into the glass office where, just an hour ago, he'd been terminated. But everything was different now. Natalie followed, the young actors chatting happily with Rita. "Please, have a seat," Harvey said, gesturing to a chair Tom had never once offered Ethan. He imagined today's felt like a bit of an emotional roller coaster. Ethan sat, still processing. "Sir, I appreciate all of this, but I still don't quite understand. Was this a test?" Harvey sat across from him, calm and clear. "Not exactly. When the satisfaction numbers dropped, some on the board claimed it was just a transition period. I didn't buy it," Natalie added. "So we launched empathy audits at a few locations, creating real-world scenarios to see how staff would respond when caught between policy and compassion. And the results," Harvey sighed, "were mostly disappointing." Ethan recalled what Miguel had said about the mechanics fired in Riverside. It clicked. Tom hadn't been the first. "We're cleaning house, Ross," Harvey said, "getting back to our roots." Natalie placed the tablet on the desk, showing a new organizational chart. "That's why we're here. We've created a new position, Regional Ethics Trainer, focused on integrity in service. The role is yours if you want it." Ethan blinked. "Me? I'm just a mechanic." "Exactly," Harvey smiled. "You understand the tools. And the people." Natalie chimed in. "Double the pay, company vehicle, flexible hours." In Ethan's mind, Jake and a safer future. Sarah, who believed kindness could change the world. Alert. I don't know what to say." "Yes, will do," Harvey grinned. "We need more people like you, people who lead by example, not just compliance." Before Ethan could respond, the door flew open. A little boy ran in clutching a familiar toy truck. "Uncle Ethan." Ethan's jaw dropped. "Tyler?" Natalie laughed. "We did a little background check when we learned your nephew was a theater student and part-time babysitter." A young woman followed him in. "I'm Kayla, Tyler's classmate." "The baby was a doll." Tyler was thrilled to help. "Uncle Ethan is the best. He totally passed the test," Natalie teased, mimicking Tyler's voice. Ethan looked down at his nephew, heart swelling with joy. "You little rascal." He ruffled Tyler's hair. "Are you mad?" Tyler asked softly. "No, just surprised. Really surprised." Harvey stood and extended his hand. "So, Ross, what do you say? Help me rebuild this company's culture from the ground up?" Ethan glanced at Tyler, and his thoughts turned to Sarah, to Jake, and to every customer who'd ever just needed someone to listen, not recite a price sheet. He thought about the joy of not just fixing cars, but fixing a system that had forgotten the beating heart of humanity. "Yes," he said. "I'd be honored." Harvey shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to the executive team." Rita burst in, eyes misty. "Wait, so Ethan's coming back?" "Not just coming back," Harvey announced. "He'll be training us, all of us, on how to do things the right way." The news spread like wildfire. Darius started clapping, Miguel let out a whistle, laughter bubbled through the garage. Natalie leaned in closer to Ethan. Sorry for the deception, but I do actually have a niece starting daycare next week, and I've driven with bad brakes before. I know that fear." "No need to apologize," Ethan replied. "But why use a car that was actually unsafe?" "Because authenticity matters. Besides, we knew you'd fix it the right way." Amid the commotion, Ethan suddenly felt it. Hope, the very thing he thought he'd lost, had come roaring back to life. Not just for him, but for every company willing to remember the people on both ends of every transaction. Tyler tugged at his hand. "Come on, Uncle Ethan. Everybody wants to see you." Ethan let his nephew lead him forward, stepping into the future, ready to repair what needed fixing. One person, one car, one policy at a time. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that the human spirit is never truly defeated, only waiting to rise.